We're at the 5-minute mark. Going to start at 6 o'clock, as we always do.
Hey, Jeremy.
Yeah. Oh, hi.
Some week.
You have a question?
Yeah, how was your week?
Oh, how was my week? Stressful. Luckily, you just...
Glad. I haven't seen a Kled in so long. That's what we have. Only except for you.
Yeah, it looks like my connection's a little bit weak. I am going to see if I can fix that.
You know. Oh, you got exhausted.
Okay. Yeah, it looks like I was connected to my neighbor's network there for a second, and I have no idea how that happened. Weird. Yeah, Ben, my weekend was pretty okay. My week was pretty okay, you know, other than pulling my hair out over the election and everything, but, you know, things came around. I really need to make it so that we auto mute when we come in here. It's just way easier for everyone. And that is an option I can do. I just have to get in the guts of it and figure it out. No, seriously, it's no problem, Nick. Everyone does it, really. I mute most people. It is 6 o'clock and we have a few people still connecting. That's totally fine. Just going to give it about 20 more seconds to make sure there's not another rush of people. Hopefully we're all a little more relaxed than we were last week, even if some things went different than how you would have wanted them. We do have most of our political answers right now, at least in terms of who's going to be making those decisions, which is, something. Remember, if it felt like a long time, remember in 2000, we didn't know who won that election until about halfway through December. So that was another ball of wax entirely. Okay, that's probably most people. So are there any questions on how things are going, major technical issues, whatever? If there's something pressing you sent me an email about that isn't super personal, feel free to ask of some of those questions right now. I haven't gotten through my emails from the weekend yet. I might have done a little spot checking, but I really haven't done that in a systematic way. So if you have to ask me something, go ahead. I believe everything is functioning right now. And Zoom isn't liking my shirt. Okay, if there are no major questions, I am gonna get started. This will be a full-length lecture. This week's content is on religion and both the anthropological and sociological study of religion. In terms of which studies religion more, this is probably more in the balance of anthropology. Sociologists do study religion some, but and I am a sociologist that studies religion, but really from the stuff I see, anthropologists really, to give credit to their discipline, do it better than sociologists do. I am trying to get the slideshow going, having a minor wrestling with Windows, but that's what we're going into right now. Just be a smidge patient. I know the most thrilling thing in the world is to watch somebody put together PowerPoint crap. And here comes the screen share. There's that element, which you should now see. If some people could click thumbs up if you see the screen share, that'd be super cool.
I see it.
Great, thanks a lot. Good job, guys. And one more minor adjustment, and here we go. This is our lecture 10.1 on religion. I'm still named Jeremy Big. So in this session, we are going to be first defining religion. Then we'll talk about what gods mean in religion, which is, there's a lot of interesting sentences I'm going to be saying in this lecture. We'll talk about some descriptive terms regarding religion. That's a slight repeat there. Then regarding terms used to describe religion, that's the same unit. I just haven't adjusted the slide. We'll talk about functions of religion, magic in religion, religion in the United States. We are going to look at a culture of the week. This week's culture of the week is just the major world religions. We're going to go over 5 of our major world religions. Then we are going to talk about the prompt for this week's essay. Earlier this weekend, I thought I would just read you a story because it is super relevant, but I decided not to do that. Namely because this lecture is going to be long enough as it is after I tell you about the major world religions. Religion is one of my favorite topics in teaching any social science class. Major reason for that is because even if you are someone who's pretty deeply steeped in religion, and some people aren't, we only tend to know the religion that we grew up with. Or if we know others, it might be like one that like we are interested in personally ourselves. Most people don't know most things about most religions. And it's important to know at least a little bit about other world religions, especially the religions that are in our communities. With that said, especially in the culture of the week, world religions bit, I am definitely leaving out massive portions. I'm summing up thousands of years of knowledge for certain religions in like 3 slides. So I am leaving out a lot of big stuff. We really have to be selective in this unit of what we look at because, you know, people dedicate their whole lives to very small portions of religions. What else? What other major things? I was thinking about this afternoon. This unit definitely has a degree of Eurocentrism to it. And maybe in the future, I will expand to talk more about Indigenous African religions, Indigenous Australian religions, a little bit more about the religions of China. But with that said, I think today's lecture, we're going to be talking about the religions that you as a person living in or around Columbus, Ohio, would be most likely to possibly interact with. So with all that said, let's get into this stuff. Defining religion. Religion can be defined as having unique content or substance relating to the sacred that separates it from other forms of knowledge and belief. And that is a wildly vague definition. It is, in reality, intensely difficult to define religion. I have taken religion courses that the whole first week, all we did was define religion. That was our whole first week of the unit, is just figuring out what exactly religion is. One of the major hurdles there is people saying things like, well, religion is how you worship God. Well, there are some religions that don't actually have a central God figure. They may not have any gods. You could say religion is how you get to heaven, or if you're trying to be a little more open-minded, how you get where you're going in the afterlife. You could use that as a definition. The simple fact of the matter is, though, that different religions have very different ideas about afterlives, And some religions don't really talk about an afterlife or even address an afterlife. And when you put religions side by side and compare them to each other, you definitely, if you're comparing Buddhism or Taoism to, say, Christianity, then, and you put them side by side and the details of those belief structures side by side, there's actually relatively little between those things. And with that said, one more time I said Christianity. I am using a little bit of a base assumption in some of my examples here in this lecture, that for the majority of you, your religion knowledge is probably based on Christianity. We'll talk about why I'm probably pretty safe in making that assumption in this lecture. So if some of my examples tend to be a little more Christian oriented, that's why, namely because it is the dominant religion in our country. And yeah, but with that said, I have plenty of other examples from other religions too that are peppered in here. I just want to acknowledge that off the bat. So you can define religion in a different way. Religion being a form of culture, a system of common beliefs and rituals centered on quote unquote sacred things that unite believers and provide a sense of meaning and purpose. That is a little bit of a social scientific definition of religion. Put it very in an applicable term, religion ritualizes and routinizes beliefs. This is effectively what separates spirituality and mysticism from religion. There are some people, especially farther west in the country, more in the California area, sometimes it's a little more common sayings like, well, I'm not really religious, but I'm very spiritual. If you don't have that mindset, that might not make so much sense to you, but that does make sense to social scientists. Some people, spirituality can be a separate thing from religion. Those people who are officially religious and part of a organized religion, their spirituality is usually tied up pretty close with that religion. But those people who aren't really tied up with organized religion, sometimes they can have quite a strong spiritual sense of self. And the difference between that person and the super religious person is that the spiritual person, their belief structures and rituals and all of that doesn't have that vast commonality. There's no priest or a religious figure saying, okay, this is what we agree we all believe. That's really the hallmark of organized religion, is some people or groups or committees in the center saying this is what we all believe. To pull an example I'm familiar with, that some of you may be familiar with from the Methodist Church, there is a major conflict within the church that has been broiling for decades, since the 70s, over the role of LGBTQ people in the church itself. That is a feud over routinizing belief and ritualizing belief. And why does that make a difference? What's the big deal? Well, the big deal is that's kind of what religions do. Let's click here. So from a sociological standpoint, we ask, what is the function of religion? Well, two major functions of religion, and there are many, many functions of religion, is to create and reinforce social cohesion. Thus, it makes us feel like we are all part of the same community, and religions are very useful for the purpose of giving people senses of community. Additionally, religion provides believers with a sense of meaning and a sense of purpose. A sense of purpose is very important for us humans. And if you are not, some people get it out of politics, some people get it out of work, some people get it out of their religion. Religion tells us what to do in important moments in life. Religion, one of the major functions of religion is to set funerary customs, to tell us what to do when our loved ones die and how to handle that and how to take care of it. And you see sometimes in traditional funerary customs, variations that may traditionally have helped those people in the past survive. You can't leave a corpse sitting around. We can't leave grandma sitting around for weeks and weeks after she dies, especially if we live in a tropic climate. We need to get that body in the ground, or we need to get that person, and this is all super crass, and I do apologize if you've gone through a loss recently. We need to get that body somewhere else because that's a safe thing to do, and if not, disease may spread. It's a major, very practical thing that religion helps us do. Weddings are another thing that religion helps us in a very functionalist sense, particularly in more traditional societies. Weddings are they create senses of community, and they also are a formal way to invite an outsider into our family unit. And it can also be a tradition to bring two communities together, especially if the people involved come from very different places, or if they have only known each other for a relatively limited amount of time. Naming ceremonies are also sometimes tied in with religion, or rituals sometimes have their origins in naming ceremonies. It's not super overt, but we see this in Judaism and Christianity with baptism rituals. What do you name this child is a common question at a baptism, and then they gave the name of the child. And we see this similarly in Judaism with the circumcision ritual with boys, where they ask what is the name of the boy before, it's either before or after the circumcision occurs. That's not super uniform within those rituals. And then rites of passage. Rites of passage are another form of ritual in which we pass from one mode in our life to another mode in our life. The most common rite of passage across world religions is the rite of passage from childhood to adulthood. That is not super common or ritualized or routinized is the better word in the United States. We don't really have that. Some societies have like a big grand event that occurs between childhood and adulthood. Let me see my next slide. Yeah, anyway, I'm going to talk about that a little bit later on. But a rite of passage effectively is a ritual that takes place religiously to move you from one position in your life to another position in your life. I'm going to come back to that in a few slides. Religious belief is an element of religion. Religious belief is the statement to which members of a particular religion adhere. It's simply what people believe. It's what they believe about the nature of the world, the universe, the afterlife, their God, their gods, etc. Belief, social scientifically, can be studied. It can be, but it's very, very difficult to study. We are highly limited on people sharing what they actually believe, right? Some people, when you ask them their religious beliefs, will say something like, well, it's none of your goddamn business, right? They might say something like that. They might lie to you, expecting you to want to hear a certain thing. Certainly, if you went to a church to ask people what their religious beliefs are, they might be way more likely to tell you the beliefs that are accepted within the church, right? But if you get them away from the church, they might say something like, well, I mean,
I don't really believe in hell, honestly, or, well, the virgin birth is kind of outlandish, right? Or any number of other things. Or someone might say, well, I don't actually really believe in God. Something along those lines, where while they were in the religious setting, they would be less likely to actually say that because, say, their grandmother's sitting right there or something. The best way to study religion, at least experience I've seen, is through observation and going to rituals and watching people and recording that. There have been some psychological studies studying brainwave patterns and that sort of thing, but that technology is both relatively new and kind of limited as well, because, you know, it's kind of limited. It's a different thing. Religious experience. Now, here's a big thing we really can't, again, it's a harder thing to study. And you'll understand this in a second. Religious experience is the feeling or perception of being in direct contact with ultimate reality, or of being overcome with religious emotion. In many religions' terms, it could be called something like feeling God's love, or being in touch with Jesus, or glimpsing nirvana from a Buddhist perspective, or from a neo-pagan perspective. It could be something like, well, I felt the magic coursing through me, or something like that. Religious experience is most typically happens or felt by practitioners via ritual, via things like the communion ritual in consuming the communion wafer and the wine, or in the Passover Seder in Judaism, of taking part in that ritualistic meal. Or this is an image of European neo-pagans. This looks like a summer solstice rite, probably, but it could be any number actual of rituals occurring there at Stonehenge. These are all things that people do with very different religious beliefs that all evoke these religious emotions. And that brings me to something that maybe I forgot to say at the top, is one of the beautiful things about the social sciences is that we can study religion, and the goal of doing that is to understand what people believe. We don't, and our goal is not to understand whether what they believe is objectively true, right? It doesn't matter to us whether what people think or believe is objectively true. What matters to us is that they believe that it is true. And what people believe, this is, if students of sociology will recognize this as the Thomas theorem. If you believe that a situation is real, if you believe that the thing is real, then it is real in its consequences. And people believe the things that they believe, and it definitely has a very real impact on their human behavior. And I think that's a really pretty amazing thing about the social sciences, because it allows us to study these very different belief structures in effectively what is a scientific way. But moving on. Religious rituals, as I just alluded to, are defined as practices performed by members of a faith. Rituals are typically performed in order to evoke religious experience, as I mentioned right there. Rituals may occur at different frequencies. Religions may be rituals may be super common. The communion ritual within Christianity is super duper common. It happens all the time. Depending on your denomination or your portion of Christianity, some Catholics take communion multiple times a week, or some very devout Catholics take it every single day if there's a place where they can. Different denominations of Protestantism do it at different frequencies with different calendars. The Presbyterian Church has its own calendar, as does the Methodist Church, as does the Lutheran Church. They basically, by committee, choose what is the most appropriate time and whatever to do that. And then again, within the individual churches, they also then might have slight variations there. The point, though, being that communion within Christianity happens all the time. Similarly, people who are Muslims may, depending on how they do their religious practice, may pray at dawn. They may pray several times a day. When they do that, they typically do it every single day or as frequently as they can. That is another example of a very common ritual. Other rituals may occur only once in a lifetime. The rituals surrounding weddings, especially within religious traditions, are sometimes intended, I suppose, to occur only once in a lifetime. Now, most religions, with that said, if your marriage doesn't work out and you do get divorced, most religions are willing to do that over again. But in the more traditional sense, in terms of religiosity, is sometimes intended only to occur once. Another thing, I suppose a better example of that would be baptism or naming rituals, right? Typically, you only do that once, but even with that said, I'm just kind of stream of consciousness now. Most Christians only baptize once, but then sometimes there are Christian traditions that do redo that. And then there can be rituals that only occur once in history. Right there, the image you're looking at is image of a ritual, a grand ritual known as the ghost dance. The ghost dance was a very, and I didn't go into a lot of detail with this week because it is intensely complex, and I didn't want to take away too much from it by not going into all the detail. But the ghost dance religion/ritual was a ritual that took place over several years in the late 1800s among many Native American tribes, particularly the Sioux and the Navajo, but it was many tribes. And the Sioux are geographically very separated from the Navajo, and the Sioux, their core territory is in North and South Dakota. The Navajo are down in New Mexico, and that whole span of tribes in between, most of them were involved in this ghost dance ritual. And what it was this mass recreation, what they would have said, recreation of the cosmos. And the goal of that ritual was to banish white people from North America. It was very much well, we got to do this. And because when you look at where Native Americans were at that point in history, it was very much the moment just prior to was effectively the destruction of their culture. So that was a ritual that took place over a series of several years, but only actually occurred once. There's no one doing the ghost dance anymore. Yeah, that's that. Now, here are some different types of ritual. I believe I have them on multiple slides, yes. There are many different types of rituals. These are just some examples. To clarify that there, when I am talking, a rite, R-I-T-E, is a synonym for a ritual. That's all that is. A rite of passage is a type of ritual that is performed to mark a significant moment in the life of an individual. I talked about this a few moments ago when I got ahead of myself. The most common rites of passage mark the transition from childhood to adulthood. These are documented being really pretty common in indigenous African religions. It is also common in many world religions, though. Bar and bat mitzvah rituals are a really super good example of a a rite of passage into adulthood. If you're not super familiar with Judaism, a Jewish young person is called before the congregation, and it's all its own service, the bar mitzvah ritual. They're called before the congregation to read from the Torah, the Holy Scriptures, in a very specific ritualistic way, and thus proving that they can read at least a nominal amount of Hebrew. In ancient times, that would be critical because that degree of literacy would have been necessary for doing things like heading a household and participating in common life. Now, the bar mitzvah ritual specifically is for boys and men. The bat mitzvah ritual is the ritual done for girls and women. The bar mitzvah ritual is not is universal across Judaism. The bat mitzvah ritual is only occurs in Reformed Judaism and is relatively new in the transitioning into modernity. I believe the bat mitzvahs didn't actually occur until about the late 1800s, if I'm correct. It might actually be even later than that. But Orthodox, to put that a different way, very, very traditional Jews don't have rites of passage for women, but many do. Another type of ritual is a rite of intensification. A rite of intensification is a ritual structured to reinforce the values and norms of a community and to strengthen group identity. There are not many great examples of rites of intensification within the really large world religions that we're super familiar with here in the United States. But we do have a really good secular examples of rites of intensification. A football game can be seen as a rite of intensification. It is an event where everyone goes all to the same place at the same time, and often they're wearing all the same colors and they do all the same things. If you've ever been to an OSU football game, they really elevate it to the next level compared to some other sporting events where they all sing the same songs at the same time, they clap to the same rhythms. This serves the purpose of a rite of intensification, i.e. meaning forming a sense of mass community. 100,000 people fit into the Shoe Stadium. That is a massive amount of people. There are more people at the school itself, but it has that sense of focus of community. And we see this in all sports, and not just OSU sports, but it's all sports as well. Anything else there? You could say that group prayer all at the same time, things like everyone saying the same prayer at the same time, also serves the purpose of being a rite of intensification. That also would be valid as well. That's just me kind of talking out the things I'm thinking. So let's talk about gods in world religions. And I titled this "How Many Gods?" because we have a lot of very descriptive words describing different numbers of gods in religions. There's a lot of adjectives in this portion. So one of the major differences between religions is how many gods they worship. We will define God as an entity that controls or created some element of the world. And there is another super vague definition for you, because when you compare across religions, especially religions that have multiple gods, it can be very difficult to define what exactly a god is and what exactly a god isn't. Yeah, but let's start to try to do that. Theism. Theism is the belief in one or more supernatural entities. Most world religions are theistic in some way, but not all are. Monotheism is the belief in a single, all-knowing, all-powerful God. Statistically, if you are a religious person, you in the United States, you are probably monotheistic. Examples of monotheistic religions include Christianity, Judaism, Islam, and Christianity, Judaism, and Islam are all share a common cultural heritage of Judaism. Remember that Jesus was a rabbi within Judaism, and then the Prophet Muhammad was also a leader that made reference to and saw the other Jesus as being a prophet within Islam. So, and following a lot of those same ideas as we see in Judaism as well. Sikhism, though, is a world religion based out of India. Sikhism is a monotheistic religion, but it is more oriented in the in Hindu beliefs than the Abrahamic beliefs of these three religions here. Polytheism is the belief in multiple gods. Examples of monotheistic religions are Hinduism and neo-paganism. I will give more detail on both of those later in this lecture where it fits best. Now, in studying world religions, we have to acknowledge, and it's pretty easy and obvious to acknowledge, that not all of these gods have the best intentions of humanity at heart. There is a subsect of gods, particularly in polytheistic religions, known as trickster gods. And this is kind of where my blasphemy starts on this slide. Trickster gods are supernatural entities that do not consistently act in the best interests of humanity. Trickster gods may be evil. They may be seen within the religion as being evil itself. Examples of this include Satan, and of course within Christianity, within Judaism, and within Islam, to acknowledge Satan as being a god is absolutely, it's a big no-no, right? But when we put it in the scope of world religions, with a god being a powerful entity that has control over things, that is really the best term for comparison. You also then bring up other questions that bubble out of the same thing of, well, what is an angel? What is a demon? What is an archangel? Are those gods? Are they something else? Whatever. It gets complicated and semantic quite quick. But again, for the sake of comparison, let's, right at the moment, consider in the scope of Christianity and whatever as being Satan being a trickster god and not being good. Coyote is a better example of a more pure trickster god in this sense. Trickster gods in most world religions tend to be not evil, but more neutral. Coyote in his stories in the American Southwest, Native American religions, and because it's based off the dog, well, it's not a dog, but the animal, coyotes. And coyote is, he screws things up. He either intentionally is messing with humans, or he just gets frustrated and messes up the whole thing. The book I was considering reading to you was in the story, the woman, the prototypical woman, wrote was writing the laws on the sky in stars. And she was doing this very meticulously in order to, so that all humanity would be able to just look at the sky and they'd know how to behave properly just by reading the laws, right? Well, then eventually Coyote came along, and being a spiritual being, a supernatural being, Coyote spoke, and he talked upright, and he acted like a human. And he said, he was talking to the woman, and he said, "What are you doing?" "I'm writing these words on the sky." And he says, "Well, this is really slow work. Are you sure you want to be doing this?" And she says, "Well, yes, of course I want to keep doing this." So then Coyote comes and he starts helping out, but then he gets frustrated and he grabs the blanket that the stars were laying on and he just flings them up onto the sky to get the job done with. The fact of the matter is that in doing that, he scattered what the message actually was, and that's why humanity is utterly and always confused, because those stars are scattered. It's that sort of thing in explaining some element of how the world works that trickster gods do. Another example of a trickster god would be Loki in Norse mythology. Now, of course, our knowledge of some people's knowledge of Loki is based off of the Avenger movies, which is not entirely inaccurate, but Loki in Norse mythology is a god who he just flips sides back and forth, very much unlike Christian and Muslim and Jewish versions of Satan. Loki will sometimes save the day. He'll sometimes completely willingly save the day and help the other gods out, but other times he will he'll kill people, he'll steal things, and he'll just do completely rotten things. He really goes both ways in that regard, but he's still part of the community of gods. A lot of the stories about community, about Loki, really emphasize that there are some people in our communities that we just have to forgive sometimes. But then there are also lines too. And you can really get into this in studying Norse mythology, because there is a point in the Norse mythologies where Loki definitely crosses a line in their story of how the world ends, the Ragnarok story, and he definitely crosses a line, and then the gods say, "Enough is enough, Loki, you're done." And then in response to them punishing him like that, Loki comes back and causes the end of the world and the death of the gods. Norse mythology is especially interesting because their end of the world actually includes the gods dying, which is it's pretty bleak and pretty dark. But that's also, I'm a sucker for a story that has a sad ending, but that's just kind of me. So non-theistic religions, talked about monotheistic religions and polytheistic religions, religions with one god or multiple gods. There are religions with no gods. This is a belief in the existence of spiritual or divine forces rather than a god or gods. The purpose of the faith itself is not to worship the gods. The purpose of the faith is to understand the forces of the universe or to make the individual a better person. That is why these religions themselves exist. I'm very sorry for that. That's why these religions exist. Examples of non-theistic religions include Buddhism and Taoism. Neither of those religions has central creator god figures. There is some variation across Buddhism in that regard. Within Tibetan Buddhism specifically, they do believe in powerful spiritual beings that are accurately classified as being gods beyond what an angel would be or whatever that in-between point is. And that's hyper interesting. Also, I do believe there are some versions of Taoism that have those sort of god structures as well, but they do not have a central omnipotent, all-knowing creator God to them, which is intriguing, right? As if you're like me and you grew up within a monotheistic faith, the fact that there are religions that don't have a central God like that, it's wild to think about. Atheism is defined as a belief in the non-existence of God, gods, or the divine. Atheism is often associated with the philosophical school, say it right the first time, of humanism. Humanism being a belief structure that believes that humans can do it on their own, humans are pretty great on their own, and that humans can achieve great things. They're often associated, atheism and humanism, they're not always associated that way. There are many very religious people that consider themselves humanists. Examples of atheist belief structures are atheism itself as a philosophy, and additionally Zen Buddhism. Zen Buddhism is a religion that emphasizes absolute simplicity. And in that absolute simplicity, they only believe in the things that can be observed. Since it's hard, if you can, to detect the spiritual, they make that assumption in a very Occam's razor sort of way that it does not exist. And they're fine with that, but that still means but they're still a religion in and of itself. It's a very intriguing concept. That question, and then this leads to another question: is atheism a religion? Right? I'm sure there are very many atheists in the world that would say, no, atheism absolutely is not a religion. I'm sure maybe there's some atheists that say atheism is a religion. Within the classifications of social science, it is rather difficult to be able to actually draw that line, whether it is or is not a religion in and of itself. I can say that atheist Zen Buddhist practitioners are absolutely religious people. A great general rule of thumb within studying religions is that basically if people consider themselves religious, then they are religious. If people consider themselves to be part of a religion, then they are part of that religion. It's all a matter of individual self-classification as being the best way to determine that thing. Now let's talk about some variations in religion. The previous portions were really kind of focusing on universalities to a degree, but here let's talk about some terms we use to distinguish between religions. Obviously, there are differences between the religions. The following slides break down, that's what I just said. And so here are two terms in our textbook that we will be looking at that are easy to confuse with each other. So that's why I decided to point them out. Animatism, and these words are hard to say, believe you me. Animatism is the belief in the interpersonal spiritual forces that infuse the universe. Animatism is mediumly common in terms of world religions. It is especially common among indigenous, what are sometimes called native religions, people that live very close to the earth, people that have hunter-gatherer societies. They tend to be a little more animatistic, I think is the proper term for it. But also Taoism is a very large world religion that emphasizes understanding the ebbs and flows of the universe and the balances between things. If you're familiar with the concept of yin and yang, those are Taoist concepts of understanding the balance of things. But also, unfortunately, fortunately, whatever, most of us may be more familiar with these concepts relating to the Force and Star Wars. That is a animatistic concept. that George Lucas decided to adopt because he's largely unoriginal. Animism, however, is a different thing. Fewer vowel sounds, but animism is the notion that all objects, living and non-living, are imbued with spirits. So they have their own spirit. And I'll give some examples of the differences between those things too. So examples of these would be Shintoism, Japanese religion. I can't remember her name right now. The woman who a couple years ago, everyone got very either excited about or fed up with very quickly. The help you clean up your house lady, I can't remember her name, that said you have to see if this thing sparked joy in you. Does this stapler spark joy? And if something doesn't spark joy, then you get rid of it. And that was, does anyone remember what's the name of that lady? It's irrelevant, it doesn't matter. Anyway, though, I'm gonna scream it in like 5 minutes. Anyway, and then often to go along with that, does it spark joy? To get rid of something, Marie Chow was her name, I think. She would instruct you to say goodbye to the object, and she would emphasize that the object does have a spirit to it, and it came into your life and now it's leaving your life. That is a animism concept right there. We also see this rather heavily in indigenous African traditions, belief that trees or rocks have spirits associated with them. We see this a little bit in Iceland to this day. Sometimes when they're building roads in Iceland, there are objections people make because they say, well, gnomes and little people live in that rock. That is an animistic concept. That, well, there are spirits associated or very close to that rock. We can't move that rock. It's a special holy rock. That's an animistic concept. The big difference with animatism and animism is that animism belief that the rock has a spirit, right? This rock, his name's Jerry. He has a name, he has a spirit. This is the rock, right? While in animatism, they believe in a spiritual force flowing in the rock and flowing out of the rock, just like it flows in you and out of you and all that sort of thing. It's about more the flow of energy, if that follows. And again, animatism is very similar to the Force in Star Wars, quite frankly, because George Lucas wanted an excuse to talk about Taoism. Now, yeah, this part I have up here at the top of the slide, I just should have had on one slide. Another two concepts that are closely related and often overlap are messianic and millenarian. Messianic religions focus on the coming of an individual who will usher in a utopian world. Technically, both, and depending on your interpretation of Judaism, but definitely your interpretation of Christianity and Islam believe in messianic futures where there will be people in the future coming back to make the world a better place. But usually when we use this term messianic, they are religions that believe that the Messiah type figure is coming back very soon, is the thing. I am very sorry about that. 1 second, I'm sorry. My doctor's calling me. Hello? Hello?
That's absolutely obnoxious. I'm very sorry about that. Blame it on OSU Medical Center. That sucks. They're calling to remind me of an appointment I have. I also could have turned off my phone. Messianicism. Yeah, so when we talk about things as being messianic religions, they believe that Jesus is coming right now. They believe that their Messiah is coming right now. Millenarianists believe that a coming catastrophe is going to initiate the end of the world and bring on a new age. So they believe that the end of days is coming, or that the world is ending. But also to go with that, after the world does end, then there will be a coming paradise after that. Now, Messianicism and millenarianism is how it's pronounced. The root word for that word right there is millennia, right? Because within the original Christian scriptures, there in the book of Revelation, it refers to an end of days that is coming in 1,000 years or so. So millenarianism within Christianity historically has popped up around 1,000 year marks. There also was a spat of millenarianism that occurred around the year 1666 because of numeric beliefs within Christianity. And then we saw another batch of it happening around the year 2000. There was a whole lot of activity around that, around the year 2000. And if you're someone who was alive during that period, and at least maybe a teenager like I was, you may remember that. The Heaven's Gate cult was specifically a religion that was both messianic and millenarian. But these ideas do exist in mainstream religions. There are many interpretations, specifically of Christianity, that believe, well, Jesus is coming back soon, so you better get your stuff in order because Jesus is coming back soon. Within the Heaven's Gate cult, this man, he called himself Bo. He believed that he was a second coming. I think he thought he was Jesus, and then his partner believed that she was the personification of God. His partner died, and then he became the messianic figure. And if you're not familiar with the Heaven's Gate cult, they did commit mass suicide. And the reason that they committed mass suicide, and I say this in all due respect to the people that died, they committed mass suicide because they thought that in killing themselves, they were traveling to a spaceship that was behind the Hale-Bopp comet that was passing by the Earth. So in committing suicide, the language they used was they were leaving their vessels so that their spirits could go to that spaceship, which let's say it didn't happen that way, probably. The Heaven's Gate cult was heavily documented because they left behind one of the first very intricate internet records, and also they made loads of recordings kind of explaining what they did. If you were alive during that time, you would have remembered that too. The late 90s were wild. Now, within religions as well, there are typically divisions between uniform and between a reformed sects and unorthodox sects. Not S-E-X, S-E-C-T-S. To be reform or to be unorthodox is to be more modern and more willing to divert from tradition. To be more orthodox is to be more traditional and to fall by a more rigid adherence to core religious doctrines. Now, I am going to walk my phone across the room so it doesn't irritate me again. I'll be back in about 10 seconds.
Okay, yeah, because if there's one thing about OSU Medical Center you can bank on, it's that they'll keep doing something even if it doesn't make any sense. To be more orthodox, again, as I mentioned, means to stick by those core religious doctrines a little more strictly. Now, orthodox is not the same as fundamentalist. Those are different terms. They mean about the same idea, but they are different. Orthodox, to be orthodox means to be rooted in very old tradition. Orthodox Jews, they root their tradition in many of their beliefs and some of their dress, depending on the group of Orthodox Jews, in hundreds of year-old tradition. This is how our community has always done this, and this is how we will always do it. That's to be orthodox. Fundamentalism, on the other hand, is actually specifically within Christianity and some versions of Islam, relatively new phenomena. Fundamentalists believe that they follow the one true religion and that people of all other faiths are either doomed or are evil, depending on the individual or individual community's interpretations there. As I mentioned, these types of beliefs have been best documented in both Christianity and Islam. I know a smattering of the bit about the Islamic fundamentalists. I know more about Christian fundamentalists, specifically the history of where that comes from. Christian fundamentalism can be pulled from about the 1920s to about the 1950s, when those ideas of, the millennia is coming, Jesus is coming soon, everyone needs to be baptized as soon as possible, and if people aren't baptized, then they definitely are going to hell. And then those also being tied up with ideas of homosexuality being very evil, of basically anything that falls outside of that relatively rigid doctrine as being evil and Satan hiding many places. That religious ideology in and of itself wasn't super common within Christianity of that degree of strictness until the beginning of the 20th century, and specifically in the United States, which is, again, I find these things very interesting. And let's talk about the afterlife, shall we? The afterlife is central to some religious beliefs. Absolutely it is. But to other beliefs, it is less important. Within Christianity, the way to attain everlasting life, for example, is to accept Jesus Christ. And many religions, the way to get to that afterlife is to follow the religion itself. And when I say many Christians, I'm talking about specifically some of my relatives, believe that, well, that's the reason you follow the religion, is to get to that afterlife. And that's the end goal of the religion itself. Now, an example of a religion that is not like that is Buddhism. Specifically, I'm not going to read through this big block of text, but this is a very quick version of the parable of the poison arrow. That is a very common parable within Buddhism. And effectively what it says is that there is a person that has been shot with a poison arrow, and if the arrow is not removed immediately, then the person will die. And the whole time the arrow is being in the person, and it's continuing to poison them, the person keeps emphasizing, well, where did the arrow come from? And who shot me with the arrow? And how long is the arrow? And what kind of poison is on the arrow? And asking all of these detailed questions without allowing the people to focus on the problem of, well, there's an arrow in you. That comparison is then made to us as human beings from the Buddhist standpoint. Buddhists don't think it's super duper helpful to try to figure out all of these extra meanings of the universe. So for this reason, Buddhists don't really pay a whole lot of attention to what the afterlife may or may not be, or the nature of a specific creator God. What Buddhists tend to focus on is how do you end your personal suffering, and how do you minimize your suffering in this world? And the Buddhist answer to that question is to meditate and to try to alleviate yourself of focusing on extra stuff and giving up attachments. That's the Buddhist equation for ending that sort of thing. So in this way, and this is a big difference between Buddhism and many other religions, is that they say it doesn't really serve a purpose to spend all your time concentrating on things that you can't observe. Those things that you can't observe might actually really be there, and that's true. But what we need to focus on here and now in this life is getting you to be able to focus and alleviate yourself of suffering. It's again a really super interesting concept. Additional variations in afterlife include, I just put these into rough categories. I'm sure there may be better categories. You can have a good afterlife, version of only having a good afterlife. So the concept of Jewish heaven, right? Within Judaism, there isn't a super strong concept of embedded into the religion, anyway, of what heaven is or what heaven isn't. The generally accepted concept of heaven within Judaism is that heaven is closeness to God. And if you've lived a good life, you will be more close to God. And if you've lived a bad life, you will be farther away from God. And there's nothing that could be a greater punishment than being far away from God in that spiritual sense. But that also is another example of a religion that pays less attention to the afterlife than other religions. Specifically, there are certain versions of very Orthodox Judaism that do not believe in any kind of afterlife whatsoever, which is, again, another very interesting variation. You could have a good afterlife and a bad afterlife. So the Christian concept of heaven being the good afterlife and hell being the bad afterlife, and then Mary versions in between, purgatory, if you will, if you're a Catholic person. So within that permutation, there are rewards and punishments for acts in this life. It could be for living a bad life and living a mean and cruel life, or it could be living a life not accepting Jesus. Again, that's varying on which type of Christian you ask. There are 2 billion Christians in the world, and many of them have different ideas. Now, going out of world religions we might not be super familiar with. The ancient Norse concept, and this was also among the Greeks, of the Norse called this hell, H-E-L, and the Norse concept of the afterlife is that almost everyone goes to H-E-L, hell, and that hell is generally unpleasant, but it's not that bad. It's basically like this plane of existence is, but the difference being with this hell is that it's deep underground, because these, again, many in the pre-scientific period, many people tended to be very literal with their religion. So yeah, the Norse hell is underground and kind of damp, but not that bad. The reward heaven was only really available to great people and heroes and people who died in battle, the Valhalla in Norse mythology. But most people you went to hell, which was a not that bad place. And I do believe, again, if I remember correctly, within Norse mythology, if you were an exceptionally bad person, there were punishment afterlives as well, if I remember that correctly. And then reincarnation, it's a different concept altogether. It's a belief that you as a spiritual entity after this life will be reborn into something else. And in doing that, within many of those traditions, your goal is to build your spirit over time and to continue developing as a spiritual entity over thousands or maybe millions of years. Yeah, that's what reincarnation is. That's that big concept. Also often built into reincarnation is the idea that if you are going to be reincarnated, then you probably have lived many times before as well. That's often built into those belief structures as well. And additionally, you could get reborn as a new person. You could get reborn as an animal, as rocks, as potentially a different spirit, maybe as the wind. And many reincarnation philosophies often have hierarchies over what is good and what is bad. So, for example, within Buddhism, a rock is a very, very bad reincarnation because it takes forever for a rock to die. A animal is a relatively bad reincarnation. Humans are seen as being, like us, being very good reincarnations because as humans, we have the capacity to learn things. And if we're able to learn, then we could evolve our souls spiritually and then get reborn as a better human and then a better human and then a better human. There's so many details to all of this stuff, and I'm just trying to give you as much as I can, as fast as I can. Let's talk about magic. So, and I had the note at the beginning of this, like many terms in this course, there are these, what I'm giving you are social scientific terms. The actual practitioners of magic may have different terms for these actual concepts. The reason why social scientists decide on certain terms and we all kind of collectively come together with these terms and these glossaries is so that we can talk to each other to compare these things. Specifically around words like messianic and millenarianism, those terms are rooted in Christianity, but we continue to use those terms even if they don't super apply that well so that we can compare them to other world religions. And if there is enough of a variation that we find an actual truly new thing, we can then make up a new term from there. But anyway, magic. Magic is defined as attempting to manipulate energy or the natural world in metaphysical terms. Again, that's another one of our big, vague definitions. Magic is magic, right? That's really what it is. But most people who try to engage in magic do it by mixing things together or moving objects in a certain way on this physical plane we have here to try to move spiritual energy. This takes us toward witchcraft. Witchcraft is action associated with attempting to harness the powers of the universe in order to get what the practitioner wants. So witchcraft is the craft of harnessing magic. Witchcraft can be good intending or bad intending, and that in religious beliefs that believe in magic, there are often stories of the conflict between good magical practitioners and bad magical practitioners. Specifically within Pennsylvania Dutch culture, there are stories of these evil witches, the Pennsylvania Dutch word being hexerei. And people who fight those witches with magic. Now, of course, the bad ones are the witches, but the people who fight the witches who are using the same general magic ideas, they call themselves either, the word is powwow, or they use other words as well. But those people, the good guys, supposedly, they don't call themselves witches. And that's a common commonality across world religions, is that many world religions, the good guys, they don't call those witches, but the good guys that are doing magic, it's just the bad guys that are doing magic are often the ones labeled as witches. We will see that variation on that when we talk about neo-paganism in a moment. What else there? Yeah, so if you want to understand the difference between magic and witchcraft, if you will, think of the witch being the electrician. Think about witchcraft being electrical work, right? So you have, if an electrician is doing electrical work and being able to make electricity or magic do what they want to do, you'll get one effect. If, however, you have some guy that isn't an electrician doing electrical work, it may or may not work, or will be less likely to work, but they still would be working with electricity. I think that's an okay example that works through. Now, there are many types of magic. Contagious magic is one form. And these terms right here are not terms that the actual magical practitioners would use. These are terms that anthropologists have classified magical practices into. Contagious magic is manipulating things that have been closely tied to individuals. So in some magical traditions, you may, and I have an important here to make in a moment, you may try to get the hair or the clothing of someone that you love, that you want to make fall in love with you, or if you want to try to hurt someone, you might also try to get hair or clothing or possession along those lines. Now, it's in some traditions that talk about these things, kind of hard to tell if this hair and clothing stuff is something that anyone actually really does, or if that's tied in with superstitions of how to keep witches away, whether you should be super careful about where your hair goes or where your possessions wind up. It's a lot of the stories of those evil witches out there doing things are really tied with fears and dangerous fears. Now, are there actual black people who believe they are doing magic to hurt people? In many societies, maybe, but that's a lot harder to actually fully verify. Divination magic is magic that is conducted to tell the future to try to tell the future, or try to tell what are the unknown things that you want to try to figure out. Maybe you want to try to find a missing thing. Maybe you want to try to know what the gods are thinking. Then you will try to do that kind of divination magic. An example of relatively common divination magic is using tarot cards. Tarot cards are one example of trying to tell the future with that sort of magical tool. Imitative magic, then, is magic that is done, something that is done in ritual to cause something to happen in the world. So in magical ritual, you may want to make, and this isn't a ritual I'm familiar with, this is just an example. You may want to try to make a big, strong house, right? Because you're building a house and you want your house to be big and strong. So maybe you would have a bunch of rocks, and in your magical ritual on your magical altar, build a little house out of rocks and make that a super strong little house, and then cover it in glue and make sure it's super duper solid. And then that would become a charm that could protect your house and keep it super duper strong. That's would be an example of imitative magic in a ritual. Here are some more magical terms. Liminal is a word that's sometimes used in these studies, as in a space or time that is, quote, in between. That condition of being in between is very important in many magical practices and in understanding, especially Western occultism. Examples of in-between places include crossroads. There are stories in the American Southeast, where we call the South, of the devil meeting people at the crossroads to give black magic to people. Now, given these stories are told by Christians, so you add that skew to that in there, and that's pretty interesting too. But stories of the crossroads as being places, like literal road crossroads, right? That's what we're talking about there. Or some magical rituals take place on beaches, because beaches are a liminal space between the ocean and the land. Or there are certain liminal holidays that take place when the earth is transitioning from one thing to another. So Samhain, within the neo-pagan tradition, that is commonly known as Halloween, right? Well, Samhain, it occurs relatively close to the tipping point of nights becoming much, much longer in the year. And then on the opposite end of that, there is the Beltane holidays surrounding the beginning of May, where the sunlight becomes greater and greater and greater. The reason why those holidays in those traditions are times of greater magic is because of the liminality of it there. Mana is another general term, again, used by social scientists. Each magical tradition tends to use their own word for this, but it is religious power focused in certain objects. A really good example of this are ritualistic tobacco pipes in Native American shamanism. This is something that is very, very important to understanding Native American cultural appropriation, because sometimes I can think of, in particular, rest stops. If you know where the Cabela rest stop is in West Virginia on the way to Pittsburgh, between Columbus and Pittsburgh, there are shops in there that sell the what look like Native American, they would call them peace pipes. Well, these pipes, especially the old ones, are very, very sacred to the Native Americans. And when they are in storage, these pipes are, I believe the point would be like right here between the shaft and the actual, the pipe bowl itself. These would be kept separated, because it's believed that the pipe itself is so powerfully magic that it can't be held together and kept together unless it's being actively used for magic. And that actually became a major issue for some museums. The point was brought up in the 1980s and 1990s that these, because museums and social scientists were actually starting to listen to Native Americans at this point. And at that time, many of these ritualistic items were being returned to the tribes and the nations. But some of them could not be returned because those people in those communities had long been killed off or whatever. So in working with Native American tribes, what they would do is they would say, okay, well, if we can't give this back, how can we keep it and keep it safe, but still respect your religious beliefs? So what they said was, well, you can do that, but you have to keep like a piece of cardboard or a piece of wood or something like that in between these two pieces. And in doing that, you are separating the magical energy of this, and we suppose that would be okay. And that's kind of an example of one such concept of an item holding great religious power or magic. Sacrifice is another term that is used relating to magic. Sacrifice in magic is something that is given to spirits or gods or supernatural forces in exchange for something else. Now, our common Western conceptions of sacrifice are often based in Hollywood and horror movies, things like human sacrifice. Human sacrifice in the modern world is exceedingly rare, and of course something that would want to be avoided. In pre-medieval Europe, there were human sacrifices that did occur, but those were, again, very rare. In modern magical communities, animal sacrifice is exceedingly rare. It doesn't happen in most magical communities, and when it does happen, it is typically performed not human sacrifice. Animal sacrifice is performed typically by very agricultural people. So people who are farmers, people who have experience with goats and chickens and that sort of thing. And, you know, if you are a farmer, you're someone who has killed many, many chickens, right? They don't do it to harness negative energy or to create terrifying pain or that sort of thing. Magical practitioners give sacrifices of things in order to show their gratitude to the spiritual forces, is really the best way to put that. So if you're a chicken farmer, well, what would the spirits want? If you're a magical person, well, something you have to offer to the spirits would be maybe the chicken. And yeah, but as I mentioned, though, in the modern world, animal sacrifice is very, very rare, and very few magical traditions actually do it. A shaman is, so this is subtitled Practitioners of Magic. A shaman is defined as a person who can access the spirit world. This does not have an official role in religion. That's very important to understand, particularly in Native American tribes. Shamans are not priests. There are some priest figures or holy figures, like your clerical kind of figures, that might do some magical elements, but in traditions that do have religious traditions that have traditions of shamanism, the shaman is their own thing. They're someone else in the community. The purpose of the priest would be to teach about the gods and nature, but the purpose of the shaman would be to actually like communicate with the spirits or to send messages to the spirits. That's a fine distinction, but it's a relatively good one. Sorcerer then is typically a traditionally very negative term. There are very few references in the Judeo-Christian Bible to magical practice, but where it is referred to, it's called sorcery, and sorcery is explicitly forbidden. Specifically, I believe it's in the book of Leviticus. Sorcery is forbidden. It is someone who consciously engages in magic, though, and sometimes a sorcerer is used as a term within anthropology, but it isn't a super great term in that regard. And then a witch is traditionally defined as being a negative term. Prior to the modern era and the rise of neo-paganism and Wiccanism, it was almost exclusively a negative term. Talk about that in a second. But in traditional stories, witches may also be non-humans. There are stories, let me think. I had a really good specific example in mind, but I can't remember. Anyway, there are stories of witches in folk magic, in folk stories. And as modern people, you think, oh, witch, a lady with a pointy hat, that's a witch. Okay, well, I'm going to hear a story about a lady with a pointed hat. But the Bell Witch, that was the legend I was trying to remember. It was called the Bell Witch. You can Google search that. But the Bell Witch was something more like a ghost. It was an invisible entity that would throw things around the house and kill crops and that sort of thing. It wasn't actually a physical person or manifestation. You have to remember that prior to the modern era, when people made up dictionary, before people had like big piles of dictionaries and could wiki search things, they just kind of called stuff, and maybe the term was accurate and maybe it wasn't. Now, relating to neo-paganism, neo-paganism is a constellation of religions that attempt to recreate the ancient beliefs of the people that lived in pre-Christian Europe. No neo-pagan is, and many neo-pagans will say this, especially like very learned neo-pagans, they are not doing the same thing as the ancient pagans. They try to do those things. They may do historic research to do those things. There are actually neo-pagan organizations that try to do that. But the fact of the matter is that many of those traditions and most of those rituals were lost in the eradication of pagan or religious beliefs by what we would call the Catholic Church. At that time, it was just the church because it was before the Protestant Reformation. But it was eliminated by Christianity in the medieval era. Some sects of neo-pagans do attempt to base their recreation of ritual on historic documents. Others do it through other methods, often things like divining what the spirits would want them to do and then use that sort of thing too. So not hyper scientific, but it's a religion. They don't have to do things super scientifically. There are many categories of neo-pagans. Some more common categories of neo-pagans include groups known as heathens. Heathens try to practice their and worship the gods of the harvest and the gods associated with the land. Druids attempt to communicate more with ancestors and nature spirits. And then there's another classification of neo-pagans that call themselves New Age or eclectic neo-pagans. They believe, I should point out in a second, I forgot to say this, almost all neo-pagans, I think all neo-pagans classify themselves as being polytheistic in general. So they believe in multiple gods. That's the most common type of neo-pagan. And then Wiccans and Wicca is the possibly the best known group of neo-pagans, but there are many neo-pagans who are not Wiccan. Let's talk about Wiccanism though here. Oops. Okay, so yeah, so there's a little bit of repeat material right here. Sorry about that. Anyway, Wicca is a relatively common type of neo-paganism. It's probably the type, if you've heard of any of these, it's probably Wicca. Wicca is a religion that believes in the interplay between two entities, two primary deities, the goddess and the god. Both the goddess and the god are very deeply in tune with nature, and both the goddess and the god are needed to recreate nature. It's very much, there's a lot, relatively, let's call it sex positive religion. Actual real sex rites are like where people have sex during the ritual I'm not saying they never happen, but it's not really part of mainstream Wiccanism. But they do things like acknowledge that, well, it's a time of great fertility, and in doing this, we will recreate the fertility of the universe by putting this dagger, which represents a penis, into this cup, right? And it's all very symbolic in almost all cases. So that is, and that's a form of magic. And in doing that around the spring equinox, they are making sure that the universe stays fertile. Those sort of religious ideas. Anything else? Wiccanism is a pretty new religion. It originated in the 1950s with the works of English authors Gerald Gardner and Doreen, I think her name is Valente, is how you say it. These people were not romantic partners. They were not writing partners. They both just kind of wrote about the same thing at roughly the same time. And then later on, once they became more aware of each other, they started working together in a community to form this new religion of Wiccanism. Wiccanism took off more in the later 1950s, and this is a fun bit of historical trivia, when Great Britain finally lifted their laws against witchcraft, because prior to the 1950s, you could actually be put in prison in Great Britain for being a avowed witch. Once they lifted those laws, then Wicca really became actually a true above ground religion. And Wiccans do often call themselves witches. That is something that they will call themselves, which, as I mentioned, is quite different than many other religions, traditions that even reference witches. So let's talk a little bit about religion as it exists in the United States. So America is unusually religious compared to our global counterparts. Most American adults profess membership in a religion. So among Americans, 77% of Americans say that they are religious, that they're religious people. 55% of Americans pray daily, and 20% of Americans share their faith online regularly, as in talking about it on Facebook or whatever in some sense or another. Now, to break that down, that's 75% of Americans, 21, so of that 75%, right, 71% of them say that they are Christians. 23% of religious Americans call themselves not religious, but, oh, okay. I'm sorry, I have to re-say what I was saying. So this all is 100% of Americans. I misread this slightly. This is actually my slide. I shouldn't have done that. So of the all Americans, religious and not religious, 71% call themselves Christians. 7%, so this would be among religious Americans, call themselves Buddhists. 0.9% call themselves Muslims. 1.9% call themselves Jewish. And then of those Americans that don't consider themselves religious would be atheists, agnostics, and people that may consider themselves spiritual or having spirituality, but not actually being part of organized religion. Now, you might read this and say, well, I know a whole lot more Muslims than 0.9% of the population, or I know a whole lot more Jewish people than 1.9% of the population. But you have to remember that this is the entire United States, right? And there's a lot of empty area out there, as you may be more acutely aware of now after we've all looked at those demographic maps of the United States surrounding votes and everything. Actually, to put that into your head, since we've all have been staring at those blue and red maps, Republicans tend to live in areas that are more or less densely populated. So those parts of the country do tend to have fewer people in them. If that's a visual thing, that would help you figure that out. And you see that in the map of Columbus, not the map of Columbus, in the map of Ohio, where you see blue dots on Cleveland, Columbus, Cincinnati, and then everything else is red. Well, the fact of the matter there is that everything else, but it's still 50-50, right? Ohio is a very, very 50-50 Republican and Democrat state, but almost all of the Democrats live in the cities, is just kind of how that goes down. And I think that the whole bit about where people live is pertaining to this right here. Cool. And also then Muslims in the United States do tend to live in city areas, Buddhists tend to live in cities, and Jewish people tend to live in cities. That is a demographic trend, a historical trend across really the globe and humanity, is that people in minority groups tend to cluster in city areas because it's easier to have your minority group population all together in a city. It's kind of a human behavior sort of thing. Obviously, there are a lot of, for example, Muslims who live in rural areas, but that would be way more common in a country that is predominantly Muslim, for example. So in the United States, youth and young adults are less likely to claim affiliation than older adults. Data show that the unaffiliated, so people who are not religious or don't consider themselves religious, are likely to share these attitudes about being unaffiliated. Often they say that religious organizations are overly concerned with money or power, or that religions are too focused on rules, or that religion is too closely involved in politics. Those are reasons people often give if they are not religious, why they would be not religious. Now, of course, people don't have to justify who they are or what they believe in, but we ask these questions so that we can, understand a different group of people. So church membership, even though there are many people that do not consider themselves religious, there is often a misperception that religiosity is going away. The reality of the matter is, at least in the United States, that we are continue to be a religious people, and especially there has been growth among conservative evangelicals in the United States. That's where the largest amount of growth is among religious people. Conservative people being those who believe more Republican type political values, and evangelical people, that being a specific breed of Christianity that believe that the goal of a Christian should be to bring as many people into the faith as possible. I think that's a fair way to sum up that set of belief. For many people, political beliefs are shaped by their faith. This is especially true for evangelical Christians. Evangelical Christians do, as I mentioned, tend to be relatively conservative in their politics, but it does also apply to other groups, including non-Christians. The Unitarian Universalist Church tends to be very, very political, and they tend to be very political on the Democratic side of things. And that is another example of religious belief and religious faith pushing the other way. So here we are on our bit about major world religions. I am going, because this is our culture of the week, I'm going to take about a 5-minute break, and we will be back here to start up again at 8, not 8 o'clock, no, at 7:50. So I'll be back starting things again at 7:50. It is currently 7:45. Okay, see you in a bit.
Okay, I am back. It is 7:50. We're going to start this all up again. Now, as I was up walking around in my house, I realized something that was bothering me while I was doing all this. It's really hard to teach this stuff while virtually, right? And I can't gauge how you're processing the information. Are there any questions or concerns that came up that you'd like some clarification on, especially as I was talking about God and the afterlife and Satan and all that? Anything there? Any need for clarification? Or did it all make sense? Brooke gave me a thumbs up. Okay, that's okay with me. Do you want any further? No, we're good there. Okay, cool. Yeah. Okay. Very good. So here we're talking about the world's major religions. That is this part we're talking about here. As with the rest of the presentation, as with many of things, I am summing up thousands of years of knowledge into 3 slides. I think these are relatively representative of these faiths, but if any of you have anything to add in these slides, please feel free to let me know, and we can talk about that a little bit. So these are our 5 largest world religions, with one caveat here. There are 2 billion Christians in the world. Christianity is the largest world religion. Islam has 1.5 billion followers, so there are 1.5 billion Muslims. There are 828 million Hindus, 400 million Buddhists, and 14 million Jews. It should be pointed out that the 5th largest world religion is not Judaism, but Judaism is on this list because of the cultural influence and relevance of Judaism to both Islam and Christianity, and also to American society. After World War II, the largest concentration of Jews went from being in Europe to being in the United States. And then that shifted over to Israel once the state of Israel was founded and established. But the second largest Jewish population in the world is the United States. So there are 2 billion Christians in the world. The major teacher is Jesus of Nazareth. Even those of you who aren't Christians are probably rolling your eyes at the well, no shit of that. But, you know, I'm treating them all equally on these slides. Central tenets of Christianity. These are things that all Christians tend to believe in one way or another. But there are 2 billion Christians, so it's really hard to say. There's a lot of variation there. That human fell from God's grace through sin in one way or another. We use that in a very broad sense. Jesus was the divine Son of God. This is something else that Christians believe. Christians believe in the acceptance of Jesus's teachings, and they believe in the forgiveness of sins via salvation, and typically that is through accepting Jesus. These are the beliefs that are at the core of Christianity. You might not know that not all Christians reject science. That is a major cultural dividing ground in the United States between different groups of Christians. You might not know that not all churches oppose same-sex marriage. This is a matter
of divisions largely within denominations, which is pretty darn interesting. There are certainly some denominations of Christians, so classifications of Christians, especially Protestants, that fully either are fully for or fully against same-sex marriage, but the major divisions within Christianity itself are within the denominations. If you are not super familiar with the Methodist Church, I'm assuming a lot of you are because Otterbein is a Methodist affiliated school. There's a major division between what are called the reconciling ministry churches and the more traditional churches in Methodism. The reconciling ministry churches are all in favor of fully including LGBT people, while the other groups are less in favor of full inclusion, I guess is the best way to put that. And that's how that rolls. And that's how a lot of the divisions within Christianity are. They're not so much between different denominations, but within denominations themselves. So Islam has 1.5 billion followers. Someone who follows Islam is called a Muslim. The major teacher within Islam is the Prophet Muhammad. There are other big teachers, but he's the main central prophet. The 5 tenets of Islam, sometimes called the 5 pillars of Islam, are belief in Allah. The Arabic for, in translating from the Arabic, Allah means the God. It is believed by most Muslims that Muslims, Jews, and Christians all worship the same God. There are instructions within the Quran, at least my understanding, that Muslims are instructed to respect the beliefs of Jews and of Christians because of that root of commonality there. At least that's how it's been explained to me. Muslims believe in the worship of Allah. That is a big distinction there, that when Muslims are praying, and if they are Muslims that pray 5 times a day, then they are not praying to ask for things, but they are praying in adoration of God, and that's what they should be doing. There is some of that concept within Christianity, but that, my understanding, is the major emphasis within Islam in that sort of prayer. Charitable giving is also an important element of Islam. Very similar to the concept of offering within Christianity. And additionally, fasting during Ramadan is also seen as being an important element within Islam. You may not know, or if you've observed, why Ramadan tends to jump around the year, why sometimes Muslims are fasting in the summertime, sometimes they're fasting in the fall, sometimes they're fasting in the spring. That's because the traditional Muslim calendar is a lunar calendar, while we in the West and much of the world follows a solar or Julian calendar. The Julian calendar was first put into place by Julius Caesar and then later adapted to be slightly more accurate, but it's based on the sun, not on the moon. And because of the dominance of the Roman Empire, and then after that, the Catholic Church, who followed that same Julian calendar, that became the standardized calendar of the globe due to colonialism, which is something we're actually talking about next week. What else? And then, of course, Muslims also believe in the pilgrimage to Mecca. Through most interpretations of Islam, that is a very important thing for the spiritual progression of the individual Muslim. Now, it is not an absolute requirement. If you can't afford it and you live in the United States, it is seen as not so big of a deal if you can't make it, but if you possibly can, it's seen as being very good. There are actually charitable organizations that try to line up trips to Mecca for Muslims. And if you don't know, Mecca is geographically located within Saudi Arabia. From an economics and sociology standpoint, I am pretty interested in the trout. I mean, it's not tourism, but the travel industry of Mecca and the pilgrimage to Mecca. I think that's a very really interesting thing. There are airlines dedicated to it and all sorts of things. It's a really pretty interesting thing. But the point of that pilgrimage to Mecca is that it is a series of rituals that takes place over the course of a week. And I believe the time you're supposed to travel to Mecca, I might be wrong, is during Ramadan. There is a specific time in the year you're supposed to go do that, but you could hypothetically do it at other points in the year as well. You might not know that not all Muslims, or especially women, are required to wear the traditional hijab dress. Hijab laws and modesty rules do also apply to men, but the male dress modes and modesty modes line up more with American male dress, and that's why we tend to recognize them less. There are multiple forms of headgear worn by Muslim women. The version we see most frequently in the United States is the hijab dress, being the third from the right there on the illustration. Other modes of dress tend to be associated with specific ethnic groups. You can look back on the difference between race and ethnicity and religion in previous conversations we've had. But by non-Orthodox Muslim women, it is seen as being a choice. I have dear friends, for example, who consider themselves to be very devout Muslims, that at some points in their lives, they have worn hijab, and other times they haven't worn hijab. And it was a matter of life transitions and professional obligations and all those sorts of things. It's seen as being a personal spiritual choice. You might not know that the vast majority of Muslims reject violence. I hope you don't think that, but if you might have heard somewhere, well, religious warfare is part of Islam, that simply isn't true. Now, the concept of jihad is part of Islam, but jihad is best translated as religious struggle. So you can, for example, have a religious struggle or a jihad to stop smoking or to stop wasting so much money on expensive video games or something like that. If you call upon your faith to try to make some sort of change like that. The concept of jihad is often misused by both extremists. So Islamic fundamentalists often misuse that idea of jihad to try to recruit people, but also Islamophobic people in the United States and other parts of the Western world, when they try to make people afraid of Muslims, they will also emphasize that whole jihad spiritual warfare thing in misinterpreting it. The fact of the matter is that jihad is best translated as being religious struggle and using your faith to overcome something. There are 828 million Hindus in the world. And Hinduism is a faith, most of us probably as being educated people, we know about Christianity, we know about Judaism, we know about Islam, but in the United States, we tend to know less about Hinduism. There are 828 million Hindus. Most of those Hindus are in India. There is a substantial Hindu population in the United States, but it is not often super visible. The major teacher or major hierarchy of Hinduism is that there really isn't any. There is no central church within Hinduism. The central tenets of Hinduism are personal or maybe family or village dedication to a god. Again, the Hindu concept of God is a little bit different than what Westerners often think of as being gods. I'll talk about that in a moment. Hindus believe in the cycle of reincarnation. So they believe that after this life, you will, and for the next couple of minutes, I'm going to be talking from the standpoint of Hinduism. After this life, you die, you will be reborn as someone else, and then your goal will continue to live a good life to get a better reincarnation over and over again until eventually you achieve this state of moksha or liberation from reincarnation. But let me go back on that in a second. So as you live your life seeking this better reincarnation, you accrue karma. So you accrue better spiritual energy, more and more positive spiritual energy, or maybe negative spiritual energy if you do bad stuff, right? And the way that you get that positive karma is through dharma. Dharma is good. There are acts that are associated with positive or negative karma. So if you murder somebody, which is a negative dharmic act, you then accrue negative karma on your soul. If you save somebody's life, that's a positive karmic act. You then accrue positive karmic energy on your soul. And then when you die, your net positive or net negative turns into a new reincarnation. Now, as I mentioned, the goal is to stop being reincarnated, though. It is not spiritually what a Hindu wants to continue to be reincarnated. They want to achieve the state of moksha, to put it in Western words, become one with God again, which I'll go in the next slide and explain that a little bit better. You might not know that Hindu devas, or what we often call gods in Western society, serve as representations of some aspect of the same supreme being. This is a common interpretation of Hinduism. It is not universal among all Hindus, but this is, again, Hinduism is a religion of great variety, but most Hindus believe that all of the gods, and I could name a bunch of gods right here, but I'm not going to. There's Shiva, there's Ganesh, I think that's Krishna. But all gods, they are pieces of the same central God, the same supreme God. And similarly, each of us are fragments of that same spiritual God, right? Now, we might be the toenail, but we are still a piece. And the goal of moksha then is, as our little piece of living better and better lives via reincarnation, we will eventually be reabsorbed up into this great God thing. And again, that's a big idea. But it's my understanding that this is the most common interpretation of moksha and of Hinduism. Now, the interesting question comes up. Well, doesn't that sort of make Hinduism polytheistic? And the answer to that is yes. No, I'm sorry, I completely misspoke. Doesn't that make Hinduism monotheistic? And that is not an entirely out there interpretation to maybe consider Hinduism a monotheistic religion. On the other hand, you could also very easily consider it polytheistic. It's a matter of interpretation. So Buddhism. Buddhism has a larger cultural impact in the United States than Hinduism does, but there are fewer Buddhists in the world than there are Hindus. There are 14 million followers of Buddhism in the world. Major teachers of Buddhism include a man referred to as the Buddha. His name was Siddhartha Gautama. It should be pointed out that within Buddhas, there are many Buddhas, but Siddhartha was the highest Buddha. When you talk about the Buddha, you are talking about Siddhartha. Siddhartha is historically rather interesting. It is historically, we have pretty good evidence to show that there was a rabbi in Jerusalem at the beginning of the 1st century called Jesus, right? We have pretty good evidence of that. We have the historic Jesus was probably a person. That's a thing. But we have very good evidence to show that Siddhartha was a person, because Siddhartha, unlike Jesus, who was a rabbi, Siddhartha was the son of a king. Siddhartha was a prince. And not only was he a prince, but he was a prince who renounced his princedom, right? So on a national scale, that makes Siddhartha, he made a much larger, I suppose, kerfuffle in his life in terms of local politics than Jesus really did. So for that reason, we have very good historic documentation that Siddhartha existed. The Dalai Lama, and you can, if you want to learn more about the life of the Buddha, there's a very good book by Hess called Siddhartha. You can Google search that really super easy. It's about, I think it's about 120 pages. It's actually a very good book, so it's a fun read. Fun is a general word there. The Dalai Lama is another character within Buddhism of great significance. He is said to be the 14th reincarnation of a monk named Gendun Drup. So 14 lives ago, this guy was named Gendun Drup, and every 80 years or so, he died, but every time he died, he came back and was reincarnated. And there is a very elaborate and very fascinating series of rituals that they undergo to find, well, who is that next Dalai Lama? Who is that new Dalai Lama? And that there are books written on that as well. To clarify, a lama is a priest. The Dalai Lama is the highest of priests. Within the structure of Buddhism, the Dalai Lama is relatively similar to the Pope within Christianity. Not all Christians are interested or follow the Pope, but all Catholics are, or most Catholics are. Similarly, the Dalai Lama has, I suppose, jurisdiction over all Tibetan Buddhists, but not all Buddhists are Tibetan Buddhists, even though there are many, many, many Tibetan Buddhists. I believe of the 2 major Buddhist temples in Columbus, one of them is Tibetan Buddhist. Buddhists are non-theistic, as I alluded to earlier. They do not believe in a central creator God. However, some types of Buddhists do believe in spiritual beings and do believe in gods. They just don't believe that a central, omnipotent God created everything. Specifically, Tibetan Buddhists have a very complex hierarchy of deities that they believe in. They just don't believe in a central creator God. And part of that is also that Tibetan Buddhists do not believe that the world was ever created. They believe that the world has always existed. And within the Dalai Lama's teachings, and that would be this present Dalai Lama who exists in this time, he makes arguments that the Big Bang theory reinforces this concept that the universe has always existed, because if you know that physics theory, the universe, according to the Big Bang theory, it's a possibility that before the Big Bang there was another universe that contracted and then exploded again, contracted, exploded again, that sort of thing. And the Dalai Lama, as a person, is very interested in that concept. Buddhists believe in principles known as the Four Noble Truths. These Four Noble Truths include that we are caught in endless suffering and rebirth as a result of karma, and that suffering results from desire or attachment. Now, suffering is not a perfect translation of this word. The better word is maybe to be messed up, or to be not balanced, or to not really be in a sense of well-being. That is the better interpretation of that word, but it's often translated into English as being suffering. And certainly, if you are not balanced like that, you are to a degree suffering. That's kind of the Buddhist concept of it. Buddhists believe that suffering or unbalance is ended by achieving nirvana, which is a blissful state of emptiness. Nirvana is, in this sense, is not really the equivalent of heaven. It's sometimes talked about as if they're the same thing. Nirvana in the Buddhist sense is more of a state of tranquility as opposed to an actual afterlife. As I mentioned earlier, Buddhists aren't super concerned with the afterlife. Many Buddhists believe that there is some type of afterlife, and certainly reincarnation. They also believe in reincarnation, but it's just not so big in the belief structure. And they also believe in following a thing called the Eightfold Path. So they believe in principles of ethical behavior, simple lifestyle, renunciation of material pleasures, and meditation. And that's only 4 things listed in the Eightfold Path, and I'm pretty sure I simplified things there. So if that was bothering you the way it just bothered me. You might not know that the Buddha and Buddhas are not gods. They're teachers. Buddhism is a non-theistic religion. So when Buddhists are praying before a statue of a Buddha, they are not worshiping that entity. They are attempting to emulate the rituals and the meditation of that specific Buddha. And also, as I alluded to as well, it isn't entirely possible to be a full Buddhist and part of that community, but also be an atheist in the sense of not believing in gods. Now, does that jive with certain atheist definitions of atheism? Maybe not. But in the anthropological sense of the words, that's how we're using it. I suppose that's the difference between capital A atheist and lowercase atheist. Judaism. There are 14 million Jewish people living in the world today. And every time I talk about that, I point out that 6 to 10 million Jews were killed in the Holocaust. It's easy to gauge how many people were killed in the concentration camps. That is just about 6 million people, but there were many more people also killed in the streets. And it would probably be more like 45 million Jews living today, if not for the Holocaust. And so it really can't be overestimated, the colossal loss of human life that the Holocaust represents. And that is an inherent part of modern Judaism. and the persecution and the communal knowledge of Judaism. That is part of the community of what it is to be Jewish. And I'm going to jump down. What are the central tenets of Judaism? Worship of and reverence for God is part of it. It's the big part. It's the religious part of it. But also community is a critical part within Judaism. And there are many Jews that consider themselves secular Jews who, and of course, how do you define who is part of a group or not, is people believe themselves to be, right? So I'm not to say that secular Jews aren't Jews, but secular Jews tend to be atheist or agnostic. They don't believe in God. They don't worship God as such, but they still consider themselves to be Jews because of that epically critical part of community to Judaism. You can't underestimate how important community and the sense of peoplehood is to Judaism in a way that isn't present in a lot of other world religions. As I jumped, major teachers of Judaism and figures are Moses, King Solomon, and Abraham, being the same Moses, King Solomon, and Abraham alluded to in both the Christian Bible and the Quran. But it should also be pointed out that Judaism is less leader-oriented than both Christianity and Islam are. You might not know, I believe I mentioned it earlier, that belief in an afterlife is not central to Judaism. Orthodox, I believe if I'm correct, Orthodox Hasidic Jews don't believe in an afterlife. They believe that the purpose of honoring and worshiping God is because they are God's chosen people and that's what they should do. That's their religious belief there. Followers of Judaism are seen as God's chosen people. And as God's chosen people, they do not feel the duty to convert others the way that Christians or Muslims may feel that need. As a matter of fact, to become a Jew, I think I find this very interesting about Judaism because I grew up in a Christian tradition that did think it was important to get new people to be Christians. Less so than some other churches, but it was still there. Now, within Judaism, to become a Jew, you have to ask 3 times. And some rabbis take that very seriously. Some take it less seriously. So a rabbi that would take it less seriously, someone approaches him and they say, so can I become a Jew? And he'd say, no. It's like, can I become a Jew? It's like, no. And then, can I become a Jew? Why, of course you can become a Jew, right? That's how some rabbis might do it, but other rabbis might do it. You approach the rabbi and she may say, can I become a Jew? No. And then like walk out the room and ignore you. And then you ask them again, can I become a Jew? No. And then do the same thing. And then on the third one, they very well may deny you the third time and just say, no, you cannot become a Jew. That is something that is acceptable within Judaism because, as I mentioned, in comparison to other faiths, they do not see the need to expand because who they are already God's chosen people. I find that to be a very interesting variation from Christianity and Islam and other faiths as well. I think that's really very interesting. Other world religions include indigenous animism, Baha'i, atheism, Sikhism, Taoism, and Confucianism. Those are often used as synonyms. They're slightly different things, but Taoism and Confucianism are different things. Jainism, spiritualism, neo-paganism, Rastafari, Shinto, Unitarianism, Zoroastrianism, Scientology, and other smaller sects and cults. Now, if there are terms on this list that are not listed anywhere else in the lecture, I am not going to be testing you on them. I'm just listing this right here on this slide as a bunch of other world religions. Interesting thing Those that have the star beside them are the world religions that are present here in Central Ohio. There are predominant atheist groups, there are spiritualist groups, neo-pagan groups, Unitarians, there are Scientologists, and there are other smaller groups that may be classified as cults. And they're all very interesting. Are there any, that's the end of this portion of the lecture. Are there any questions? No? Okay, I can feel we're almost there to being done, I promise. I can feel your tiredness, and I'm pretty tired too. But with that said, we are going to jump over to Blackboard and Marie Kondo. Thanks for mentioning that. So many. Oh my God, everyone's screaming Marie Kondo at me. Okay, Marie Kondo. Anyway, let's look at Blackboard just to go over what I'm expecting of you this week, because I anticipate some questions if I don't actually do this. I'm going to share the screen over to that. Here we are. And you can see I was looking up images of the devil for pictures to include there. I'm sorry, I misplaced. Maybe this is right. I'm sorry. There we are. There's Otterbein. Can you guys see my Blackboard right now?
No.
You can't?
No.
Okay, thanks. That's why I ask. Okay, very good. 1 second. Is it there now?
Yeah.
Fantastic. So, in looking at our work for this week and going to, one more thing here actually. So next week, we're talking about colonialism and power. And then for week 14, we are scheduled to talk about social change. Now, I may change that around a little bit, and I'll definitely know that by next week. But I might reconfigure week 14 to be a review session for the final because I don't know if we'll have time for that to make that work during finals week. So I may shift week 14, but I'll definitely have that shift finalized by next week. So I'll let you know that by next week. Anyway, though, moving into this week's work. So this week, you are to participate in a discussion. There is a film listed right here that you are to click on, and I do suggest do you see the film right now? Anyway.
Yep.
Okay, thank you. In doing that, I do suggest going full, sorry. I do suggest going full screen on it, namely because the advertisements on this particular page tend to be, I guess the best word is kind of trashy. There's no actual nudity, but they're just kind of unsavory. And I really wish
that this documentary website would clean their stuff up. But yeah, just go for that full screen mode there and you'll be totally fine. Anyway, though, so that's the discussion. And to access that discussion, you just click on participate discussion 4. And I see Rachel West has already posted. That is a good job. Then the other thing I want you to do is to explore creation stories. Creation narratives are often an important part of culture of a religion. And here I have listed 4 creation stories. I want you to choose 2 of those creation stories, to click on them, to read it over. You'll see that these are relatively short stories, but they are stories, and compare 2 of those. So you could compare the Cherokee creation story to the Zulu creation story. You could compare the Judeo-Christian creation story of the 7 days with the Norse creation story. Any permutation there, go ahead and do that. And in doing that, answer, what is the basic story being told? What values about that society are being portrayed in the creation narrative? And is this creation intended to be taken literally, or is it more metaphorical? Is it possible to live in the modern world and fully perceive this story as being quote unquote true? So you can talk about the nature of metaphor and explore all that kind of liberal arts thinking if you so desire in that portion. So does that all, let me just does that all make sense? Any questions there? And I want your first, go ahead.
For the discussion, how many people did you want us to respond to? 2?
Good question, Andy. Yes, I want your initial post to be up by Wednesday. So that's 1, and then respond to 2 people. Yes. So for a total of 3 for maximum points. Any other questions? Do we feel comfortable with the work we're doing this week? Or do we know what we're doing, right? Yeah.
Yep.
Great, fantastic, good work. Okay, that's what I like to see. I like to see those thumbs. So that would make it. It is just about 9 o'clock or somewhere along those lines. I think we're good for the evening. I will be catching up on my emails probably in the next 24 hours or so if you need anything. And then I will talk to you next week with a full game plan on how we are ending out this semester. And then we'll go from there. Okay, so have a good night and continue to stay safe.